I remember standing there, cap slightly crooked, fingers gripping the edges of my diploma like it might float away if I let go. Everyone around me was beaming, families hugging, cameras flashing, someone laughing so hard they snorted, and I just stood there, trying to breathe. My chest felt tight, but not from pride. It was the kind of tight that comes when you're waiting for something bad to happen. Because deep down, I knew he wouldn't let this be about me. Not for long. My mom stood off to the side, clutching her purse like it held her together. She smiled at me. Well, tried to. That small, practiced smile she'd mastered after years of damage control. She looked like she wanted to say something, but then... He stepped forward. My father, Maurice, the man who never let a good moment go by without poisoning it. He walked up to the microphone with the same smugness he wore to breakfast every morning, and I swear, the whole room shifted. People quieted. Even the air got heavier. He started by saying he was proud of me, but the way he said it, God, it was like someone throwing a rose into a trash can. He joked about how long it took me to graduate, laughed about my artsy phases and useless degrees. Then came the punchline, that I was a waste of time and money. People laughed, some nervously, some because they didn't realize it wasn't a joke. I stood there frozen, smiling like a puppet, cheeks burning hot, heart trying not to crack open in front of everyone. I couldn't look at anyone, not my professors, not my friends, not even my mother. My legs moved before my brain did, carrying me out the side door and into the parking lot where I finally let myself cry. I didn't sob. It was quieter than that, just tears spilling out like they'd been waiting years for permission. And right there, in the middle of cracked asphalt and wilted balloons, I made myself a silent promise. One day, he'll regret ever opening his mouth. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. The idea of sitting across from him at the dinner table, pretending we were anything close to a family, it made my skin crawl. I ended up at a 24-hour diner on the edge of town, the kind that smells like burnt coffee and old pancakes. I slid into a cracked leather booth, still in my gown, still wearing that fake smile like it was glued to my face. No one asked questions. I ordered fries I didn't eat and stared out the window like I was waiting for my life to change. What stuck with me most wasn't what he said. It was how easy it was for him. How natural it seemed to tear me apart in front of a room full of people. He didn't stumble over a single word. No hesitation, no flicker of guilt. Just pure, polished cruelty. Like he'd been rehearsing it his whole life. And maybe he had. After all, this was the same man who used to call my childhood drawings clutter and my tears dramatics. The same man who once threw out my college acceptance letter because he thought I was getting ideas. I kept hearing his voice in my head, looping on repeat. A waste of time and money. Over and over like a cruel lullaby I couldn't unhear. My throat felt raw, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. But underneath all that pain, something else started to stir. A quiet, burning clarity. I wasn't going to fight him with screams or sobs. I was going to fight him with silence, with success, with a life so big, so unshakable, it would make his words look small. That night, I didn't cry because I was broken. I cried because I was done. And when the sun finally rose, casting gold across that empty booth and my untouched plate of fries, I felt something shift inside me. Like something had been buried and was now clawing its way to the surface. No one else would have noticed. But I did. It was the beginning of a new voice inside me, my voice. And it whispered something I'd never allowed myself to believe before. You are not his to destroy. I didn't talk about that night for years. Not to friends, not to therapists, not even to myself, really. It just got filed away somewhere dark, behind all the other moments he'd stolen from me. I learned to smile with my mouth and keep my thoughts locked behind my teeth. That became my survival tactic. Smile, nod, move forward. And I did. With a kind of stubbornness that surprised even me. Every new step, every job, every opportunity, I poured myself into it like it was the only thing keeping me upright. People always said I was driven. What they didn't know was that I was being chased. Not by him, exactly, but by that voice, that look, that feeling of never being enough. I carried it like a second shadow, silent and heavy. And yet, it pushed me. I didn't want to prove him wrong, not really. I wanted to erase him, to live a life so rich, so complete, that his absence would feel like a blessing, not a wound. But no matter how far I climbed, that memory waited, like a thorn in a silk dress. It would catch me off guard sometimes, in boardrooms, in elevators, during perfectly normal moments, like brushing my teeth or standing in line at the grocery store. A flash of that night would hit me, his voice echoing through the auditorium, my mother looking down, the shame clinging to me like smoke. I'd feel it all again, just for a second, and then I'd breathe through it, straighten my shoulders, and pretend I hadn't just time-traveled back to the worst night of my life, because that's what you do. You carry it quietly. But deep down, I never stopped waiting for the day I could rewrite the ending, the day I wouldn't have to pretend anymore. The day I could look him in the eye and finally say, I remember everything. And maybe, just maybe, that day was coming sooner than I thought. After that night, I cut him off completely. No dramatic goodbye, no angry letters, just silence. I moved out, changed my number, deleted anything that tied me back to him. And it was strange. Freeing, yes, but also disorienting. Like stepping off a boat and realizing the shore was further away than you thought. I wasn't healed, not even close. But I was in motion, and sometimes that's enough. I threw myself into work like it was oxygen, like I couldn't survive without it. I started small, entry-level admin at a tech startup. Long hours, low pay, but I didn't care. I was good at keeping my head down and my standards high. People underestimated me at first. Soft-spoken girl with a messy bun and a steel spine they hadn't noticed yet. But I noticed it. Every time I stayed late, every time I solved something no one else could, that voice in my head, the one that used to be his, got a little quieter. I wasn't trying to climb the ladder. I was the ladder. I just hadn't realized it yet. The higher I rose, the clearer my mind became. I was no longer reacting. I was building. Layer by layer, I created something he couldn't touch. By 31, I had my own company. My name on the door. My ideas in motion. People looked at me like I was a force, and I learned how to believe them. I became the kind of woman I used to daydream about when I was hiding in my room, trying not to cry loud enough for him to hear. That girl, she didn't disappear. She just evolved. Quiet power. That was my thing. And through it all, I didn't once look back. I didn't ask where he was or how he was doing. I figured whatever life handed him was none of my business anymore. But life has a way of catching up, doesn't it? And just when I thought I'd outrun the past, it decided to show up on my doorstep, dressed in old clothes and a desperate smile. I heard bits and pieces over the years. Family whispers, mutual acquaintances, the occasional slip from my mother. Maurice was slipping. First his company took a hit, then his marriage, then everything else. By the time he hit bottom, there was no mistaking it. The man who used to walk into rooms like he owned the air was now living out of a rental unit he could barely afford, chasing unpaid bills and dodging debt collectors. And I didn't feel sorry. Not then. Not yet. Just numb. There's a strange satisfaction in seeing someone fall from a throne they built out of other people's pain. I'd be lying if I said I didn't take a certain cold comfort in it. He'd spent so many years trying to make me feel small. Now, the universe was shrinking him. And while some part of me understood the cruelty in thinking that way, another part, the bruised, trembling version of myself that still lived in me, felt seen. Maybe it wasn't justice, but it felt close enough. No one came to his rescue, not his old colleagues, not the friends who used to laugh at his jokes, not even the family members who once nodded along while he made me the punchline. It turns out, when your whole identity is built on control, people disappear the moment you lose it. And I had no intention of being the exception. Not after everything. I built my life from the rubble he left me in. He didn't get to ask for anything now. At least that's what I told myself. But then one afternoon, I got the message. Short, formal. Like he was writing to a stranger, which in a way, he was. Iris, I need to see you. Please. And just like that, all the air felt different. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours. I thought I'd blocked him. Turns out some ghosts find their way through the cracks. I didn't respond right away. I wanted to ignore it, to toss it aside like one of his old insults. But I didn't. Something in me, curiosity, anger, unfinished business, kept me from deleting it. I read it again, and again. The message was so brief, so careful, it almost made me laugh. Maurice, the man who never asked for anything, now reduced to 3 words and a period. I tried to picture him writing it, alone. Hunched over a phone he probably couldn't afford, swallowing whatever pride he had left. It was a strange image, and yet the thought of seeing him again made my skin crawl. I didn't owe him kindness. I didn't owe him anything. But I also couldn't stop imagining the look on his face when he saw who I'd become. Maybe that was petty. Maybe it wasn't. I wasn't looking for revenge, not exactly. But closure, maybe. A reckoning even. Not for his sake. For mine. The truth is, I never got to speak. Not really. He always controlled the narrative. This time I'd be the one holding the mic. So I agreed. One short reply. A time, a place, my office, not a home, not a cafe. I didn't want comfort. I wanted control. And maybe I wanted him to see the empire I'd built on the ashes of everything he'd tried to destroy. I didn't know what he wanted. Money, forgiveness, a second chance. It didn't matter. He was coming into my world now. And this time, I wouldn't be the one walking out in tears. But I didn't expect to feel what I felt when he finally walked through those glass doors. He looked smaller. Not in size exactly, but in presence. The man who used to fill a room with his criticism now barely took up space. His jacket was threadbare, the collar fraying. His shoes looked like they'd walked through more than just weather. And those eyes, the ones that used to slice through me without blinking, now darted nervously around the lobby, trying to act like this wasn't humiliating. He didn't recognize the receptionist, didn't know the security guard, didn't realize every detail around him had my fingerprints on it. When I walked out to meet him, I didn't rush. I wanted him to sit with the weight, to absorb the weight of my name etched in silver on the wall. Iris Wren, founder and CEO. He stood when he saw me, trying to look put together, like he wasn't standing in the middle of his own reckoning. "You look good," he said, like we were catching up at a family barbecue. I didn't reply. I just gestured toward the conference room. Not my private office, not somewhere warm, neutral, sterile, safe. He sat across from me, his hands resting awkwardly on the table, like he didn't know what to do with them. I watched him carefully, every twitch, every swallow. He looked like a man who'd practiced this moment and was still getting it wrong. And then, with a breath so shaky I could hear it catch in his throat, he said it. "I'm proud of you." I didn't flinch. Didn't blink, just stared back. Proud? That word, from him, felt like a stranger trying to wear my father's voice. And then he made it worse. "You wouldn't be who you are if I hadn't raised you the way I did." I could almost hear it, the way he still needed to win, even now. Like this was some twisted validation of his parenting, as if emotional scars were trophies, as if his cruelty was part of the blueprint. I felt something cold coil in my chest, not rage, not even grief. Just this deep, unshakable clarity. He still didn't get it, and maybe he never would. I leaned back in my chair, letting silence do the heavy lifting. He shifted uncomfortably, clearly expecting me to fill the void, to offer him some soft landing. But I didn't. I'd spent years swallowing my words, turning my tongue into a bandage. Not anymore. "Let's not pretend we were ever a family," I said, and my voice didn't shake. I saw it hit him, not like a slap, but like the slow realization that the door he thought was open had actually been locked for a very long time. His mouth opened, maybe to argue, maybe to defend himself, but I raised a hand, stopping him with the same quiet authority he used to throw around like a weapon. "You want something from me? Then you're going to work for it." He blinked like he'd misheard me. And maybe part of him had. He'd walked in expecting a yes, or at the very least, a version of forgiveness dressed up as charity. What he got was an offer, a very specific one. Not money, not help. A job. "I need a janitor," I said plainly, "at one of our properties across town." His face crumpled, just a flicker, but I caught it. "The team there doesn't know who you are. They won't. You'll show up, do the job, that's it." He stared at me like I'd lost my mind. And maybe I had, just a little. But I wasn't doing this out of spite. Not entirely. I needed him to understand, in the most visceral, undeniable way, what it felt like to be small, invisible, powerless. It wasn't revenge. Not exactly. It was a mirror. I was offering him a reflection of what he had made me feel for so many years. And the cruelest part? He could have walked away. He could have said no. But he didn't. That pride of his, it was already chipped. I could see him weighing the humiliation against the desperation. And desperation won. He nodded, barely. It was the kind of nod that wasn't really agreement. It was surrender. And in that moment, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. I had imagined this day 100 different ways, me towering, him groveling. But now that it was real, it didn't taste like justice. It tasted like dust. Still, I gave him the details. Address, hours, a name he'd use. Mark, not Maurice. There'd be no special treatment, no acknowledgement. He'd be anonymous. Just another man in coveralls, pushing a mop down hallways he'd never dreamed his daughter would own. As he stood to leave, I watched his back. The same back I used to follow down grocery store aisles, car keys swinging from his belt loop, barking orders like I was a soldier, not a daughter. He didn't look back. He just walked out, shoulders rounded, hands buried in the same coat he wore to my graduation. And all I could think about was how strange it felt to see him exit on my terms this time. Quiet. Alone. Like the ghost of a war long over, still walking the battlefield. After he left, I sat in that conference room for a long time. No music, no phone, just the sound of the air conditioning humming above me. And I felt it. This sharp, unexpected ache. Not for him, but for the version of me that used to crave his approval like oxygen. She had waited for that apology, that hug, that moment he'd say, "I'm sorry." But it never came. What came instead was something much colder. A transaction, a role reversal. And I'd initiated it. I didn't regret it. But something inside me had shifted. I had taken back the power, yes. But I had also reopened a door I thought I'd locked for good. And somewhere deep down, I could already sense. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something far more complicated. He showed up. Every day. Early. Dressed in faded blue coveralls that didn't quite fit, and shoes that made more noise than necessary on the tile floors. No one knew who he was. To them, he was just Mark, the new janitor. He kept his head down, did the work, never asked for anything. And I watched. Not directly, of course, but through cameras, progress reports, casual mentions from the team. Every mop, every trash bag, every fingerprint wiped from the glass felt like a silent echo of what he'd once done to me. There was no cruel satisfaction in watching him clean the floors of the company I built. No smirking, no dramatic monologue playing in my head. Just a strange quiet, like standing in a room that used to be filled with noise and realizing it's finally still. Sometimes I wondered what he was thinking while he scrubbed toilets or took out recycling bins. Did he replay that night at my graduation? Did he finally understand what it felt like to be dismissed, to be invisible? Or was he simply surviving, one shift at a time? I never spoke to him during those weeks. Never passed him in the hallway or shared a nod. He blended in like background static, and that was exactly how I wanted it. My team had no idea. He was just another face, another body. And that anonymity was part of the lesson. For years, I'd been forced to live under the weight of his presence, Now he was living under the weight of my silence. That was the difference. He had to see me, my name, my leadership, my success, everywhere. And I didn't have to see him at all. The strange thing is, people started to like him. They said he was polite, quiet. A little sad, one intern told me once, but kind. And I didn't know what to do with that. That wasn't the man I knew. That wasn't the voice that told me I was a burden. That wasn't the man who called my ideas embarrassing or made me feel like a guest in my own skin. But people change, or maybe they just get worn down enough to soften. Either way, I wasn't ready to believe it. Not yet. I didn't plan to bring him up during the leadership panel. It just happened. The question was about resilience, about what it means to rise after being broken down. And something in me cracked open, quietly, but all at once. I told them about the man at my graduation, how he stood in front of my entire class and turned what should have been a milestone into a memory I couldn't scrub out of my skin. I didn't say his name. I didn't have to. The pain in my voice did the work for me. People leaned in, their faces shifting from curiosity to quiet outrage. A few jaws tightened. One woman actually whispered, "Unbelievable." And I felt it. Not power exactly, but clarity. I wasn't speaking as a victim. I was speaking as someone who had endured, rebuilt, and returned with her spine straighter than ever. That man, I said, thought he had the final word that night. But he didn't, because today, that man works for me. I paused just long enough to let it land. He just doesn't know that every mop he pushes, I see it, and I remember. The room erupted in applause. Not wild or explosive, just steady, affirming, electric. I looked out at the sea of faces, none of them aware that the man I was speaking about was outside the door, cleaning the very floor beneath their feet. There was a kind of poetry to it. Years ago, I stood on a stage, humiliated. Now I stood on a stage, respected, remembered for my strength, not my shame. And he? He was the one now invisible. Background noise. A man in coveralls with no name badge. Later that evening, I watched the security footage. There he was, outside the auditorium, head down, pushing the mop, right as I delivered that line, right as the audience clapped. He paused for a second, just a second, and something in his posture shifted, slumped a little, slower. I wondered if he heard me, if those words made it through the doors, through the years, through the thick wall of silence we'd built, or if the weight of it all had finally started to settle on his back, one pass of the mop at a time. The next morning, he didn't show up on time. For the first time since he started. I noticed, even though I told myself I wouldn't. I kept refreshing the attendance logs, glancing at the monitors. A silly part of me thought maybe he'd quit. Maybe that panel had pushed him too far. But then, around mid-morning, there he was. Quiet, slower than usual, eyes fixed on the ground like it held all the answers he never found in his life. He went straight to work, not missing a beat. But something was different. I watched him through the glass as he wiped down a table in the break room. One of my interns walked past him, smiling politely. He gave a soft nod back, and for a moment, he looked like someone I didn't recognize. Not Maurice the tyrant. Not Mark the janitor. Just a man. Old, tired, human. And it hit me. What scared me most wasn't what he'd done. It was how much of him I still carried. How many of his habits had shaped mine. How long I'd lived trying to be nothing like him, only to realize how closely our ghosts walked. I told myself this was justice, a quiet, slow burn kind of justice. But that night, as I sat in my office with the lights off and the city stretching out beyond the glass, I wasn't sure anymore. I had all the power now. The titles, the respect, the silence. And yet, something still felt unfinished. Not broken, just unresolved. Like a note held too long in a song that needed to end. I didn't want his apology anymore. I didn't even want his pain. I just wanted to stop remembering. But memory doesn't ask for permission, and it was in that strange in-between, between closure and control, that I started to wonder, what if I had become the echo of the very thing I tried to escape? What if, without even realizing it, I'd built my freedom out of the same sharp edges he once used to cage me? I should have seen it coming. The shift. The moment everything flipped on its head. But when he stormed into my office after hours, eyes bloodshot, voice low, breath trembling, I wasn't prepared. Not for the words, and certainly not for the way they landed. "You knew," he said, almost like a question. "All this time, you knew who I was." I didn't speak. There was nothing to deny. The truth was baked into every hallway he'd swept, every trash can he'd emptied. He stared at me, wounded, shaking. "You orchestrated it." He wasn't yelling. That's what made it worse. He didn't sound like the man I remembered. He sounded like someone undone, not furious, not cruel, just defeated. "I know what I did to you," he whispered, voice cracking under the weight of it. "But what you did? It's worse." That landed like a punch I didn't see coming. I opened my mouth to fire back, but nothing came out. Because deep down, in a place I didn't like to visit, I'd already asked myself that same question. He wasn't wrong. He wasn't right either. But he wasn't wrong. And standing there, eyes wet, shoulders hunched like he'd been carrying ghosts for miles, he didn't look like my father anymore. He looked like a man on the edge of some truth he wasn't sure he could survive. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't demand anything. He just said, "I thought I was the villain, but I think maybe I made one too." And then he turned and walked out, like he hadn't just unraveled the very foundation I'd built my life on. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just stood there, heart thudding against my ribs like it wanted to escape. His words echoed in the room long after he left. "You're worse than I ever was." Maybe it was a last jab. Maybe it was honest. I didn't know. But it rattled me in a way nothing else had. And that night, when I got home, I found the letter. The envelope was unmarked, just my name, handwritten in shaky script I hadn't seen since childhood. No return address, no dramatic signature, just paper. Ordinary, quiet, and terrifying. I hesitated before opening it, because some part of me knew this letter wasn't a plea or a manipulation. It wasn't a trap. It was something else entirely. I unfolded the pages and my hands trembled more than I wanted to admit. The words inside weren't polished. They weren't clever. But they were honest in a way he never was when I needed it. He wrote about things I didn't even realize he remembered. The time I stayed up all night working on a science fair project, and he silently watched from the hallway. The time I cried in the back seat after a ballet recital, thinking no one noticed I missed a step. The way I used to hum when I was nervous. He remembered. He remembered everything. And tucked between the words, he'd included photos, old drawings I'd made as a kid, crumpled, colored outside the lines, signed with little hearts and misspelled dreams. I stared at them for so long it felt like the room had stopped breathing. And then, at the very bottom of the letter, in a final line that hit harder than anything he said to my face, he wrote, "You won. But I was never your real opponent." It was like the ground shifted, like someone had taken the weight I'd been carrying and turned it into water, suddenly everywhere, seeping through the cracks I'd worked so hard to seal. I didn't know what to feel. Guilt, relief, rage, grief? All of them, probably. But what I felt most was confusion. How could the same man who tore me down carry pieces of my childhood like treasure? How could he recognize my pain and still be the one who caused it? There were no easy answers, no perfect moral to tie it all up. Just a question echoing in the quiet, louder than anything else. If he wasn't the enemy, then what had I been fighting all this time? I sat alone in my office long after midnight, the city outside flickering with a kind of indifference I used to envy. The letter lay open on my desk, those faded childhood drawings spread around me like quiet witnesses. I could feel something breaking, not like glass, but like ice. Slow, cracking from the inside out. I didn't want to cry. I fought it the way I always had, but this wasn't the kind of pain you could power through. This was the kind that comes for the part of you that never got to speak. When the tears came, they weren't dramatic. They weren't even loud. Just silent drops rolling down my cheeks as I leaned forward, face in my hands, no audience, no armor. I cried not for the father I lost, but for the girl I used to be. The one who waited years for an apology she thought would never come. The one who thought power would protect her from pain. And most of all, I cried because that voice inside me, the one that used to say, "Prove him wrong," was finally quiet. I reached for the photo, the one I hadn't seen in decades. Me, maybe 6 years old, sitting on his lap. We were both smiling, real smiles. No tension in our bodies, no weight behind our eyes, just a father and a daughter, frozen in a single perfect moment that somehow survived everything else. I stared at it until my vision blurred. Then, without thinking, I whispered, "So why does it still hurt?" The words slipped out like breath, like confession, like surrender. No one answered. Of course not. That moment wasn't about answers. It was about the ache that lives in all of us. The ache for love, for recognition, for repair. I'd built a life out of strength, out of silence, out of the refusal to be broken. But in that final, private moment, I realized something terrifying and true. Being unbreakable isn't the same as being whole.